Good afternoon, I'm Bakhtiar Sanova and you are watching AnewZ. Let's see the top stories shaping our world. Fragile peace. Israel accuses Iran of violating Trump-brokered ceasefire. Iran denies allegations. NATO leaders are expected to approve a new defense spending target of 5% of GDP during a summit in the Netherlands. The European Union and Canada have agreed on a new security and defense partnership. After nearly 2 weeks of missile strikes and mutual threats, Israel and Iran have agreed to hold hostilities under U.S. mediation. Iranian state television reported Tuesday that a ceasefire had begun in its war with Israel, even as Israel warned the public of a new missile barrage launched from Iran.
Israel has agreed to US President Donald Trump's proposal for a ceasefire with Iran after it achieved its goal of removing Tehran's nuclear and ballistic missile threat. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement posted by his office on Tuesday.
Following the directive of the political echelon, the ceasefire went into effect this morning. This morning, it can be said that the IDF fully met all the objectives defined in Operation Rising Lion. The Chief of Staff instructed the IDF to maintain a high level of alertness and readiness for a powerful response to any violation of the ceasefire.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi initially said that there was no agreement on any ceasefire between Israel and Iran. However, later he added in a post on X that if Israel stops its illegal aggression against the Iranian people no later than 4 a.m. Tehran time on Tuesday, the Islamic Republic has no intention of continuing its response afterward. US President Donald Trump announced on Monday that a ceasefire between Israel and Iran would take effect following nearly 2 weeks of escalations. Posting on Truth Social, Trump said that a complete and total ceasefire would be implemented between the two countries. He wrote, "On the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will, I would like to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war." The announcement came shortly after Iran carried out missile strikes targeting a US base in Qatar. However, after the ceasefire announcement, missile exchanges were continued between Israel and Iran. Iranian state television reported that Israel conducted heavy airstrikes on Tehran late Monday night. Tehran's air defense systems were activated in response to incoming targets, marking what it described as the most intense air defense clashes since the 13th of June. Later that night, Israel also reported that a fresh round of missiles was fired from Iran. Sirens were activated in multiple cities, and the IDF announced that defensive systems are operating to intercept the threat. Iranian state media also reports that Iran has fired a last round of missiles towards Israel before a ceasefire comes into effect. Israel says at least 4 people died and 22 were hurt in the southern town of Beersheba.
Iran has launched missiles at the U.S. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar on Monday in response to recent American airstrikes at the weekend. Qatar says it intercepted the attack with no casualties. Regional airspace was briefly shut down as authorities urged calm.
Explosions were heard across Doha on Monday as Iran launched what it called a devastating and powerful missile strike on the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest U.S. military facility in the region. The attack comes after U.S. forces dropped heavy bunker buster bombs on Iranian nuclear sites at the weekend. Tehran vowed retaliation. The response came swiftly. According to Qatar's Ministry of Defense, multiple missiles were intercepted mid-air by Qatari air defenses. Qatar says there were no casualties.
The state of Qatar condemns in the strongest terms the Iranian missile attack on the Qatari Al Udeid air base. This attack represents a flagrant violation of Qatar's sovereignty and contravenes the principles of good neighborliness and an assault on international legitimacy and international law. The state of Qatar affirms that it reserves the right to respond in accordance with international law and in proportion to the nature and scale of this attack.
Qatar closed its airspace shortly after the attack, diverting incoming flights. The UAE and Bahrain followed, shutting their skies amid regional tensions. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it launched the operation Annunciation of Victory, claiming responsibility for strikes on US bases in Qatar and also in Iraq. Tehran said in a statement that Iran will not leave any attack on its territorial integrity, sovereignty, and national security unanswered under any circumstances. Iranians took to the streets of Tehran on Monday to celebrate Iran's attack on the Al Udeid U.S. airbase in Qatar. On social media, U.S. President Donald Trump wrote that Iran has officially responded to our obliteration of their nuclear facilities with a very weak response, which we expected, and have very effectively countered. He thanked the Emir of Qatar for his efforts toward peace and said that early notice from Iran allowed U.S. forces to avoid casualties.
World leaders are preparing to gather in The Hague for what NATO's Secretary General is calling an historic summit. Mark Rutte, speaking ahead of the two-day event, laid out ambitious plans to boost defense spending and strengthen the alliance.
The Netherlands is ready to host its first ever NATO summit on Tuesday, amid mounting pressure on allies to meet growing security threats heads-on. In a speech ahead of the gathering in The Hague, Secretary-General Mark Rutte outlined what's at stake. It's his first summit in the role, and he used it to call for unity and action.
And we meet at a truly historic moment, with significant and growing challenges to our security. As the world becomes more dangerous, allied leaders will take bold decisions to strengthen our collective defense, making NATO a stronger, a fairer, and a more lethal alliance.
Over the next 2 days, NATO leaders are expected to approve a new defence spending target of 5% of their GDP. That's a dramatic jump from the current 2%. Rutte says it's not about more money, but faster production and closer coordination with industry. The increase in defense spending is something US President Donald Trump has been insisting on for a long time. There will also be a major focus on Ukraine. Rutte says European and Canadian allies will provide more than 35 billion euros in new security assistance this year alone. President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to attend meetings during the summit. And while tensions with Russia, Iran and China remain high, NATO's message is clear. This alliance is prepared to act and invest to secure the future.
The European Union and Canada have agreed on a new security and defense partnership. The deal comes as both sides face rising geopolitical threats, from instability in the Middle East to growing economic tensions with the United States. The EU-Canada summit in Brussels also addressed urgent issues around Iran, Ukraine and global trade.
On Monday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, European Council President Antonio Costa and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met in Brussels a day ahead of the NATO summit in The Hague. The summit, described by EU officials as not business as usual, marked the start of a new era in EU-Canada relations. At the heart of the talks, a first-of-its-kind EU security and defence pact with a country from the Americas. The deal paves the way for joint work in crisis management, cyber, maritime and space security, as well as arms control and support for Ukraine.
We have just signed the European Union-Canada Security Defence Partnership. It is a reflection of our mutual commitment to peace, transatlantic security and deeper cooperation in building defence capabilities. While NATO remains the cornerstone of our collective defence, this partnership will allow us to strengthen our preparedness faster and better, to invest more and to invest smarter.
The new pact will also give Canadian firms access to the EU's €150 billion safe military procurement programme, supporting joint investments across transatlantic industries.
We will now swiftly launch talks on Canada's access to a joint military procurement instrument. We call it SAFE. It's €150 billion. And together we will define where our cooperation can have the most value added and where we should channel joint investment.
Ukraine remained a key priority. Both sides pledged stronger industrial and economic cooperation to support Kyiv's war effort.
And of course it will be good for our continued support to Ukraine, because the more we invest in the highly innovative Ukrainian industry, the more the industry will be capable and the better Ukraine can defend itself.
The summit also tackled the escalating tensions with Iran were high on the agenda after fresh missile attacks on US targets in the Gulf.
Iran has pursued nuclear weapons. These are violations of international law. These are the ones we look to.
We must commit to ensuring respect for nuclear non-proliferation treaties. Thus, Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. We must work towards peace. Peace obviously means we must avoid escalation.
As global tensions mount, Brussels and Ottawa are signalling a deeper alliance, one focused not just on trade and diplomacy, but on joint defence and strategic readiness. The new partnership, leaders said, is just the first step in building a stronger transatlantic front.
A Russian drone attack overnight killed an 8-year-old boy and 2 adults in a village in Ukraine's northeastern Sumy region, according to local military authorities. 3 others were injured in the strike, which reportedly hit homes on the same street. Ukraine's State Emergency Service released a video showing a burning house as rescuers worked at the scene. Authorities said the victims were from different families and were killed in their sleep. The full extent of the damage is still being assessed. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky have announced a military co-production agreement during a visit to London. The announcement comes amid the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war and follows a recent deadly attack on Kyiv.
In a show of deepening defence ties, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced a landmark military co-production agreement after they met in London on Monday. The deal, the first of its kind between the two nations, was disclosed at Downing Street, where the leaders also addressed Ukrainian troops receiving training under Operation Interflex.
I'm really proud that this afternoon we're able to announce an industrial military co-production agreement, the first of its kind so far as Ukraine and the UK are concerned, which will be a massive step forward now in the contribution that we can continue to make, and is really a symbol of not only our joint work in this conflict, but the 100-year agreement that we've put in place.
Zelensky expressed gratitude for Britain's continued support and emphasised the value of shared military experience.
It's a very historic moment. It was, and the good result of today's our meeting is this additional decision of co-production. And I think it will be very strong and will strengthen both nations. It's very important as to share our experience, your experience, by the way, first of all, your experience on the battlefield and your knowledge and experience during Interflex training missions.
At this point, not many details about the specifics of the agreement have been released so far. The London visit also included meetings with King Charles III and parliamentary leaders, and comes just a day after a deadly overnight assault on Kyiv, one of the most intense attacks in recent months, that left at least 9 people dead and at least 33 others injured, involving a barrage of more than 350 missiles and drones. While Ukraine's air defences intercepted the majority, the attack caused significant destruction, including the partial collapse of a residential building.
Afghanistan has condemned the recent US airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites, warning that such actions threaten regional stability. Our Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
Afghanistan has strongly condemned recent US attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities, calling the strikes a serious violation of Iran's sovereignty. The statement comes amid growing fears of wider conflict in the Middle East. In a statement, Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs described the US strikes as unacceptable, urging all parties involved to step back from confrontation and commit to diplomatic solutions. The ministry warned that such military action only increased the risk of escalation and further instability across the region. The statement emphasized the importance of respecting national sovereignty and territorial integrity, stressing that the ongoing conflict must be resolved through peaceful negotiations and dialogue, not military aggression. Afghanistan also expressed concern over the potential humanitarian and security consequences of continued attacks, stating that regional stability must be preserved through cooperation and restraint. Following the Israeli strikes on Iran, Afghanistan is also experiencing a dramatic increase in air traffic. According to local news and data from Flight Radar 24, the number of daily flights over Afghan airspace has surged more than 5-fold, reaching around 280 per day. Airlines have rerouted flights to avoid Iranian skies due to security concerns, making Afghanistan a preferred corridor despite ongoing risks. As regional tensions rise, Afghanistan is calling for calm and diplomacy. Tamim Bahis reporting for AnewZ from Kabul, Afghanistan.
Tensions are escalating sharply after U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. As missile attacks continue in the region, people are evacuating through the Astara state border crossing between Iran and Azerbaijan in increasing numbers. Our correspondent Zeynep Farizadeh has more.
Behind me is the Astara border, and today more and more people are crossing over from Iran into Azerbaijan, unsure of what comes next. We are just meters away from Iranian territory, and the tension is rising. After United States strikes on Iran's nuclear sites, Tehran's military now says it considers American targets fair game, not just Israeli ones. A senior commander warns that the U.S. should expect heavy consequences, while Iran's new military chief, Major General Amir Hatami, promised a decisive response. Iran's supreme leader has also weighed in, calling Israel's bombing campaign a big crime and a big mistake. The statement came just hours after a missile was launched at Israel. Here in Astara, we have seen a steady stream of Iranians, some with families, some alone, quietly crossing the border. They won't speak on camera, but their urgency says enough. Meanwhile, President Trump will meet with his national security team on Monday to discuss next steps.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze says his government remains committed to joining the European Union by 2030. Responding to criticism from European officials, he said recent statements reflect a deep value crisis within the EU bureaucracy. Kobakhidze expressed hope that Europe will overcome its current economic, democratic and institutional challenges. On the topic of Georgia's visa-free regime, he called for an end to what he described as political blackmail and stressed that Georgia continues to maintain open communication with its European partners. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan met with the Georgian Minister of Internal Affairs Gela Geladze during his official visit to Yerevan. According to officials, discussions focused on migration issues, joint crime-fighting measures and plans to sign new cooperation agreements. The two sides also reviewed shared regional challenges and stressed the need for coordinated efforts to maintain peace and stability. Uzbekistan has become the leading country in Central Asia in terms of foreign investment in 2024. That's according to a new report from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. At the most recent Tashkent Investment Forum alone, agreements worth more than $30 billion were signed. Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
Uzbekistan ranked first among Central Asian countries in the volume of foreign capital inflows at the end of last year. According to the report from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, a total of $2.8 billion was invested in the country's economy. Turkmenistan came in second with $1.6 billion, followed by Kyrgyzstan with $705 million. Uzbekistan continues to show steady growth. In 2024 alone, investments in digital sector amounted to $900 million. This was made possible thanks to reforms in telecommunications and rising demand for digital services. Over $1 billion was also directed toward major transportation projects, including highways, logistics, and railway infrastructure. Between 2020 and 2024, the country carried out more than 40 energy sector projects, attracting a total investment of $18 billion, the highest figure in the region. Interestingly, Uzbekistan rise happens against the backdrop of a global slowdown. According to the same UN report, global foreign investment dropped by 11% last year, falling to $1.5 trillion. It marks the second consecutive year of decline in international capital flows. Uzbekistan's economic transformation continues under the National Uzbekistan 2030 strategy. The plan aims to grow the country's gross domestic product to $160 billion and raise the average income per person to $4,000 a year. To achieve these targets, the country is placing strong emphasis on attracting foreign capital and expanding its export potential. Just a few years ago, such progress would have seemed unlikely. Until 2017, Uzbekistan maintained tight currency controls with an artificial exchange rate and a parallel black market. Conducting foreign currency transactions for businesses was difficult. That changed with sweeping reforms, and the currency market was liberalized. Legislation was introduced to protect investors, and dedicated government agencies were established to attract international capital. Economists say Uzbekistan's economy is becoming more diverse, unlike some of its neighbors that still depend mostly on raw materials exports. Uzbekistan is developing different industries which could help the country better handle future global economic challenges. Fariza Kalimurzina, AnewZ, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
With tensions easing for now, attention is turning to how the broader region, including the South Caucasus and Central Asia, is reacting to this fragile truce between Israel and Iran. What does the ceasefire mean for regional diplomacy, and how long could it take for countries to rebuild their ties with Iran, assuming the truce holds? To help us unpack these critical issues, I'm joined by Nargiz Mammadova, expert in international relations at STEM Analytical Center in Baku, Azerbaijan. Nargiz Mammadova, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Nargiz, how are key countries in the South Caucasus, such as Azerbaijan, Armenia and Georgia, reacting to this Israel-Iran ceasefire?
Thank you for the question. It's a very essential question for the regional security and raises an essential point about the regional security in perspective. We already knew for a couple of months that things going on the nuclear weapon strategy of Iran already possesses a huge risks and concerns to the region, and in this case to be able to promote and to show a stable foreign policy is very essential. And I can say this is what Azerbaijan did, and as well that we see that the regional countries as Azerbaijan, again Armenia and Georgia, like in these configurants, they all try to show a balanced position, because any imbalances can cause a huge risks for the security and security concerns in the South Caucasus. But what I want to mention more is how Azerbaijan's foreign policy on a diplomatic way was a very successful point during these days, while the attacks and the things going on between Israel and Iran. Azerbaijan opened the borders for the humanitarian purposes. We know that lots of the people from the Embassy of Switzerland, the Embassy of Canada that are in Iran, all the employees are now in Azerbaijan in a safe place, and I think that it's a huge case of the humanitarian aid and humanitarian perspective in the foreign policy of Azerbaijan.
So what has been the initial response from Central Asian states like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, given their complex ties with both Tehran and Tel Aviv?
Well, I think that the Central Asia is trying to be also balanced in case of Israel and Iran track. I will say that mostly Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. However, we all know that Turkmenistan has a really great vision and great relations with Iran. And so Turkmenistan, but we know that the foreign policy of Turkmenistan is neutrality. So they also try to balance. You know that what I can say that the main point here that all the translogistic and all the transport communications and links China via Europe, it's now only can be done with the middle corridor and with the corridor that passes not through the Iran but passes through Azerbaijan, Georgia and goes to Turkey and to other European countries. To that case, we should say that the case of North-South corridor, which was a very, some experts say that it is a very prospective transport link, is now under the stress and under the concern of the, in the case of the theory of international law and by the theory of international relations.
Nargiz Mammadova, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. We truly appreciate your time and expertise. Thank you very much. That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to AnewZ for more.